The Kremlin has warned that lifting restrictions on Ukraine's use of long-range weapons would be a dangerous escalation and a blow to any hopes of a political solution to the Ukraine war. Now, that response came after German Chancellor Friedrich Merz confirmed that Ukraine is now allowed to target military sites inside Russia using Western-supplied weapons. Now, Merz was speaking ahead of an expected visit by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy to Berlin this week.
There are no longer any range restrictions on weapons supplied to Ukraine, neither by the British, nor by the French, nor by us, nor by the Americans. This means that Ukraine can now defend itself, for example, by attacking military positions inside Russia. It couldn't do that until a while ago. With very few exceptions, it didn't do that until a while ago either. Now it can.
And I'm very pleased to welcome Nathalie Tocci, the director of the Italian Institute of International Affairs in Rome. So Chancellor Merz's announcement being seen as a major departure for Germany. Do you see this as a sign that Europe is finally asserting itself more forcefully, or is it still too little too late to really change the trajectory of the war?
Well, I mean, I think it's both things at the same time. I mean, it's very clearly I don't know if too little, but certainly too late, in the sense that, here we are 3 months and 3 years into this war, and both on the side of the kind of military support provided to Ukraine and also the sanctions on Russia, it has been an incremental approach throughout. And very clearly, this incremental approach has been part and parcel of a protracted war. So on the one hand, yes, obviously, it's too late. Whether it's too little or not, or whether this is, a Europe that finally asserts itself, it certainly is a Europe that asserts itself more than it has done so far. And I think it's a Europe that is less gripped by its own fears that have made it very much the subject of Russian propaganda, and Russian propaganda essentially saying, hey, well, if you do X, Y, or Z, this is going to constitute a dangerous escalation, and who knows where this is going to end us up, perhaps in World War III. Well, as I said, at this point in time, every step that was taken, every incremental step that was taken, actually, that escalation has happened to the extent that it would have happened anyway. So it hasn't been a response of the assistance provided to Ukraine or the sanctions provided to Russia. And as I said, that incrementalism has been part and parcel of a protracted war.
And perhaps shaken out of its own fears, in part by the unprecedented bombardment of Ukraine that we've seen from Russia over the weekend. President Trump has now described Vladimir Putin as having gone absolutely crazy. From your perspective, I guess I have to ask you this, has Putin genuinely lost the plot here, or is this escalation part of a calculated strategy?
Well, I mean, I think if Putin had gone crazy, that was the argument to make 3 years and 3 months ago, certainly not now. In a sense, now Putin is behaving in an extremely rational way. Because he's essentially behaving and reacting to the fact that there seems to be very little willingness, in fact, no willingness on the side of the United States to exert any pressure on Putin. So essentially, this is the opportunity that Putin has to escalate, right? So in a sense, the craziness was really, as I said, 3 years ago, when all of this began, in a situation where it was always, at the very least from the very beginning, crystal clear that Putin's maximalist war aims of politically controlling the entire country would have never been and continue never to be achievable. But the action today is very much the rational consequence of the behavior in the White House, which basically has given Putin a free pass up until now.
And based on their actions today and also what we see coming out of the White House, what do you think Europe should be doing right now? And I mean, not just in terms of arms deliveries, but also in shaping the diplomatic and political narrative.
Well, so I think diplomatically, to an extent, what Europe has been doing, and what Europe has been doing together with Ukraine is basically demonstrating that the emperor has no clothes. And what I mean by this is that the reason why there isn't a ceasefire and there isn't a peace agreement and there isn't a meaningful negotiation is that Russia doesn't want it. So I think, already Europe has, up until now, played that, I think, fairly important role with Ukraine. Then, of course, there is indeed the military reality. And the military reality is one in which very likely we're going to see a war continue in the next weeks, certainly, and possibly in the next months. And in a situation in which the United States steps aside diplomatically, and perhaps steps aside militarily, Europe basically is called to fill in that gap. And then, of course, there will come a day in which there will be a ceasefire. And maybe we're talking about the end of the year, maybe we're talking about next year. No one really has a crystal ball. And of course, that will be the moment in which Europe will also have to step in terms of providing security guarantees, i.e. providing a reassurance force, and moving forward, if not with the Euro-Atlantic, at the very least with the European integration of Ukraine.
And in the event of that ceasefire, tell us more specifically what Europe could do then after the fact, what it could offer to Ukraine.
Well, I mean, basically, of course, the first and the foremost guarantee would have been Ukraine's NATO membership. As we know, that is not really on the cards. It will probably, to be honest, it was never really on the cards. And certainly under Trump, it will not be on the cards. And so given that the question is and will remain one in which, how to secure the 80% of the country which remains free and democratic, and therefore how to provide security guarantees. This is essentially the only way, given that NATO is not an option, the only way to do this is precisely through a reassurance force. It's only if Europeans really have skin in the game that basically they can provide a second best alternative, if you like, to Ukraine's NATO membership alongside the EU integration of the country.
And just before I let you go, I do want to ask you about an idea from French President Emmanuel Macron. He wants to see a deadline imposed on Russia, and he's hoping that he can somehow turn Trump's frustration with Putin into action. Is Europe risking deepening its own paralysis with this idea, or do you think it could work?
Well, look, I think this is, in a sense, a game whereby Europeans will have to keep on putting, I would say, in a sense, Trump on the spot. Because, to be honest, given half a chance, Trump will side with Putin. I mean, all the evidence seems to suggest this. And so I think there is some merit in Europeans continuing to act to demonstrate the fact that if there isn't a ceasefire, the reason is that Putin doesn't want it. Not so much because this will somehow magically turn Trump in favor of Ukraine. I don't see that happening. But I think there's a substantive difference between the United States, which is hostile to Ukraine and hostile to Europe, and a United States which is, in a sense, benignly indifferent to Ukraine and to Europe. And whereas we can deal, and Ukraine can deal, with a benignly indifferent United States that steps aside, it is extremely difficult to deal with a hostile United States alongside a war with Russia.
Nathalie, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for making the time. That is Nathalie Tocci of the Institute of International Affairs in Rome.